In Angular 16, Karma was deprecated and Jest was introduced in an experimental mode. So what should we do now? Should we rely on the old stuff, which is already outdated? Should we go with the new one, where we also know that it's not going to be very stable, or should we do no testing at all? Very strange, but I'm going to answer all of these questions and even more in this episode. So as I have now your attention, hello, my name is Rainer Hanekamp. I'm a trainer consultant at Angular Architects. So first of all, we will take a look at the past situation, what the landscape or how we did more or less testing in Angular, what issues there were. Then we will look at the current situation, then of course also how the future will look like, and I have prepared some examples to showcase that as well. Let's start. So before Angular 16, when it came to testing, we had our Angular CLI projects where testing support was more or less provided out of the box. So Angular came with Jasmine, which is one of the three major testing frameworks in the JavaScript ecosystem, next to Jest and Mocha. The problem with the testing framework is that it just runs in the normal Node.js process. So Angular is of course a front-end framework and it needs to, in a way, render things in the DOM. So there needs to be a DOM context or something like this. Jasmine is missing this. And that's why Angular came or introduced something else, which is called Karma. And Karma, in a way, took the Jasmine test, embedded them into a browser, which means that the code in the Jasmine test code was not able to access the web API. So the document query selectors, all that stuff, which normally is provided by a browser, was now also available in these tests. And of course, also the Angular framework in terms of rendering had also a browser that it could interact with. So Karma, in a way, you can see it as some kind of a tool, as a vehicle, together with Jasmine, that runs the Jasmine tests inside of the browser to give us access to the web API. In terms of integration and also in terms of building up or compiling these tests, we didn't really have to care how it is done. This was done also by Angular more or less out of the box. So we just write our tests, we just say ng test, and everything was just executed. So this is the official way how to do it. But next to Jasmine, there is also another testing framework, which is called Jest. And many people switched over to Jest and kind of left the official way. Why? Jest is actually based on Jasmine. So Jest was more or less developed at Facebook or at Meta, and they took Jasmine and said, yeah, it's a very good tool, but when we want to make it more performant, then of course there is one huge obstacle, and that's the browser. So we need to get rid of the browser in some way by still keeping the possibility to access or to have the web API. So what these people say, what the Facebook developers did, is this, that they said, okay, we are kind of integrating not the browser, but an emulator that can emulate this DOM environment. And they call it JS DOM. So this is what Jest uses now instead of the browser. It's a very lightweight emulator which provides us a limited set of web APIs. So this means if you have a test and you want to access local storage or an audio tag and you want to play music, so you write a test which is doing this, then it might work with Jasmine. In most cases, it wasn't really necessary. So we don't write tests that kind of really depend on the full local storage or on the audio tag or some other advanced things. We usually mock these kind of parts. And this meant more or less that now with Jest, with this limited functionality, we more or less got rid of this browser and got more performance. This was one step. The other step in terms of improving Jasmine and making more or less Jest was that it kind of had this parallelization out of the box. So whereas with Jasmine, when we have just one single browser running, the tests are executed sequentially. There are some plugins to parallelize them, but by default it executes sequentially. That's not necessary anymore with Jest because it's just JS DOM, it's a normal library, and you can generate quite a lot of threads and then in a way can parallelize your test execution. So a very good thing. And the other one which more or less is more important when it comes during development time. So when we write our tests, not when they are executed in the CI system, is this watch mode, this interactive mode that Jest also provides. So Jest, for example, says if we have committed all our source code and we do just a small change, then Jest is able to understand what types or what tests are actually affected by that particular change. The change can be in our application source code, it can also be in our test, but Jest will make sure that only the affected tests are executed. Which means if you have 10,000 tests and you make a small change that only affects 5 of them, then Jest only executes these 5 and leaves the rest more or less untouched. So these 3 measures or actions or performance improvements, the JS DOM instead of the browser, the parallelization out of the box, and the interactive mode, in my opinion, are one of the main advantages over Jasmine that Jest provides. And in a way, that's also a reason why quite a lot of Angular developers chose to go with Jest, leave the official path, and go back and not use Jasmine. Well, and now let's take a short look at Jest and Jasmine. So I have here a bunch of Angular projects. As we see, we start with the first one, which is the Angular CLI that comes with Jasmine. So when you run ng-new, that's what you actually get. And if we take a look at the app component spec, then we see it's not doing that much. It's a simple test. We are rendering the app component, and in order to execute this test, I need to go into the Jasmine directory. I just say ng test. Angular now is doing all the build process, is doing all the integration part, and here we see that Karma is used in order to start the browser and execute the tests. And because it runs inside of the browser, I can do things like setting here the debugger statement, which means as soon as I open my DevTools and I rerun the tests again, we will see that the breakpoint, or that we stop now at the breakpoint, and on the left side we see that actually we can see something, that the component here is really rendered in the browser. So that's it, what Jasmine and Karma are actually doing. And if we take a look at Jest itself, so that would be Jest community. Why is it called community? It's called community because it's a normal Angular CLI project, but the main difference is that in my Angular JSON, I'm using here Angular builder's Jest run instead of the default Angular builder, which is responsible for the test. And well, with this version, I say ng test again, and this time no browser actually opens. The tests are very fast. We see that everything is again working, and well, of course, the obvious thing is that no browser is in there, so I couldn't really set the debugger statement. I need to use my IDE when I want to set the breakpoint and all that stuff. But this is more or less how Jest works, and also where the performance comes from. And now the next topic is about how the Jest integration in Angular actually works and what pitfalls, what issues the Angular community is facing with it. So from Angular perspective, there is no support for Jest. This is a community project. Angular says, we provide the Angular CLI, we decided to go with Jasmine. So if you want to have support from us, that's what you have to use. If you decide to go another way, good luck to you. So the problem with Jest is that Jest needs now also to compile the source code on its own. It doesn't get any help from the Angular CLI. With Angular, we know that there is an Angular compiler. So there is a compilation process going on where the complete metadata, the decorators, so add component, add injectable, everything of that is understood and is compiled in the right way so that in the end it all makes sense and plays together. So somebody needs to teach this to Jest as well. And that somebody is the Jest preset Angular, which is which is a community project maintained by only 3 people, but it forms the basis for the Jest builder, for the NX builder that they are providing. So everybody in the Angular ecosystem, in a way, is relying on that preset for Angular which is maintained by these three obviously very intelligent people. So far so good. I mean, it's an open source project. We know things can happen. There are some issues, but they will also fixed very soon. But then something started to happen which nobody at first understand what's going on. Jest started to slow down and we saw some kind of errors popping up. And the reason for that is that ECMAScript modules were on the rise. So ECMAScript modules, they are more or less the successor to CommonJS, which used to be the standard, the way how we defined our dependencies. So in the past we said const something, require something from that file. So the require command was more or less CommonJS. In these days we say import something from that file. This is now the official ECMAScript module standard, if you want to say so. And Angular was pushing ESM very hard. So they said, we are now in a way kind of providing only ESM. All the libraries, all the Angular libraries also need to follow suit. And in the end, we ended up with the complete Angular ecosystem providing the kind of compiled stuff in ESM. This means for Jest, it didn't really understand ESM. Jest only were kind of understood CommonJS. So what Jest had to do is that it had to, in a way, kind of compile or transpile ESM to CommonJS back. Now the problem is, we are talking here now not just about a single file, we are talking here about the complete Angular framework, about the complete Angular libraries, and Jest had to go through all of them in order to do the compilation and in order to be able to execute them. And of course, if there were some other libraries that also decided, so non-Angular libraries, and they also decided that they went with ESM and didn't provide a CommonJS alternative, and Jest had to do the same thing for them. So this was where Jest started to slow down quite a bit. And we had a situation where Jasmine tests, although they were using a browser, were faster than Jest. Not because during the runtime Jasmine is faster, but because during the build time, the time it took that Jasmine actually could start to execute its test were much faster, because Jasmine, of course, was supported by Angular, so it was integrated in the Angular CLI. That the complete build process was more or less now taken over or was done by Angular itself. Currently, it started to improve quite a bit. We see that Jest is now also working on an experimental support for ESM. All the existing community projects which provide Jest support are already running in this ESM experimental mode. If you want to know more about this topic, about this particular issues with libraries and ESM, then I recommend you to read the article from Thomas Trajan. And now let's take a look at this. So what I have to do is that I say test, and this time show config, and this will print out the complete configuration of Jest. And there are two important things here to remember. First one is the transform property. That's key. So we have here two transformers. This is the way, or the transformers are used by Jest in order to compile our source code. And the first one is obviously ts-jest. So that's more or less, that's the TypeScript compiler that transpiles TypeScript to JavaScript. But we also have here the Jest preset Angular. This is the workhorse. So this is the one that knows how an Angular component, how an Angular service needs to be transpiled. If that one would be missing and Jest only relies on ts-jest, then it's just a normal TypeScript application from Jest perspective, and obviously it wouldn't be able to compile our Angular application. So this is the critical part of it. The second thing are the transform ignore patterns. What do they do? This is some kind of this opt-out where we say whenever Jest sees that inside of the node modules, so this is about the dependencies, it's not about our source code that we write, it's about the dependencies. But as soon as it encounters an MGS file, then it should not transpile it, and it should more or less execute it as it is natively, because Node.js is able to execute ECMAScript modules natively, obviously. And of course, this is then where we gain quite a lot of in terms of performance. Where are these MJS files located? Which kind of libraries provide them? Well, in Angular, more or less all of them. So if we take a look at the node modules directory, and if we go into Angular, then we see here that the FESM and the ESM ones, so these are the flattened ECMAScript files, they are all with MJS. And this is then of course also what Jest would pick up and would not transpile. So that's the approach, that's the configuration of Jest when we use the Angular builders together with the Angular CLI. And if we would go with NX, so then I would have to say instead of ng test, just NX test. And if we scroll again a little bit to the top, then we see more or less the same thing that we have already seen before. So we have here our TypeScript compiler again, and also the Jest preset Angular. So both NX and also the other approaches, as I said, they all build upon this preset Angular project. And of course, when it comes to the transform ignore patterns, we have more or less the same thing again. We are kind of opting out from the MJS files. So if you've been following until now, you might have an idea what Angular might be able to do differently than the current community projects are doing, because Angular will now do the build process for Jest. So Angular says, okay, look, you don't need to care about these different things, like ECMAScript modules, wrong configuration. I will take care of it. I have my build process, so I will provide the compiled tests for you. And then when it comes to the execution of Jest, it has it just right away in front of it, compiled, everything is perfect, and Jest just needs to execute the test, and that's it. And now let's take a look at this. Now about the experimental Jest mode, which is directly coming from Angular itself. So again, I have here a normal Angular CLI based project. If I run ng test, then we see that Karma starting up. I can already cancel that because we have already seen how it works or how it looks like. And if I want to activate now this new command or this new approach, then I need to go into Angular JSON. I need to search for my test builder more or less. We see here that in this case we are using Karma. I'm replacing Karma with Jest. And then what is necessary in terms of options? Well, the polyfills, I have to keep them. Same is true for the TS config, but for the rest, these are just things that are required when the thing runs in the browser, so we don't need to have any styling information. So I can remove it. Then you also need to install the dependencies. There are 3 additional dependencies you have to install on your own. They are Jest, the Jest environment JS-DOM, and types Jest. Yeah. Third step is that in your TS config, you replace Jasmine with Jest, and then you are ready to go. So when I now run npx ng test, we see that it's kind of telling us, hey, this is Jest, it's running in an experimental mode. We see that all the tests are kind of working, so we just have 3 of them, but they're working quite fine. And the main question now is, where are these tests kind of executed? And for that, we have here our dist folder. And in this dist folder, we see test out, where we have a list of all our compiled spec files, so just the app component spec MJS, and also all the dependencies, so all the bundles that Angular normally also includes within a build, but here they, of course, are also required by the test, so they are also in this test out directory. Which means when Jest is executed in test out, it doesn't need to compile anything anymore, because everything is already right there. It uses the native ESM support from Node.js, and that's it. It just needs to execute the tests right away. And if you're interested to see how Angular is doing that at the moment, then we have here the Jest builder, the source code. It's very easy to identify the main points. So first of all, Angular is starting the build. This is done here. So it includes our test files, which of course also then include all the dependencies which are necessary. So it's doing the complete build on its own. And then if that is more or less done, it starts a new process where it executes Jest in the experimental VM modules. This is the flag that enables the ESM support of Jest itself. And that's it, more or less. Except there is one further important thing that I want to mention. The build process is using ESBuild, as we see here. So ESBuild is the new one, the better one, I would say, the faster build process, because ESBuild is written in Go, which means it is compiled down and it executes way faster. There are some statistics that say 50 to almost 100 times faster than with normal JavaScript. And ESBuild is one of the main reasons why these other tools, these other build tools that we have in the JavaScript ecosystem, like Vite or vtest, are so popular and are so fast, because in the end, they all just use ESBuild. And now we have it in Angular as well, which is a very good thing, I would say. So we see if Angular says they want to take on Jest, then they do it for real and not just halfway or however. So finally, about Karma, the deprecation of Karma. When Angular says that they want to deprecate Karma, that of course that doesn't mean that they are also going to deprecate Jasmine. That one will stay, so you don't need to throw away your Jasmine tests. The only thing that changes is that Angular under the hood will replace Karma with a modern tool, which is the web test runner, coming from an open source project hosted by Modern Web. And the reason is that Karma is already a very old project. So Karma has been around since Angular version 1. And of course, it might be a good point in time to go to a new alternative. So we can take a look at the web application, Modern Web or the web test runner. Again, it's more or less doing the same thing that Karma's doing. It just embeds existing tests into a browser. It provides 3 options to do that, with Puppet here, with Playwright, or also with Browser Stack. I would bet a lot that the Angular will use or will kind of recommend to go with Puppet here, because it's directly coming from Google as well. And I have already prepared here an example, so there is not so much to see at the moment. It's nothing related to Angular, but in a way, I have here some kind of test. In this case, I'm using Mocha, and then you just have to imagine that in the future, you will have the Jasmine test, which is testing your components. But in the end, as I said, you don't need to change it. You just change the way how the tests are executed. So in my case, this is now the web test runner. And if I click here on Add Test, I don't see so much inside of my console. I see that everything was working successfully, but I guess that Angular will go to do, when they are of course also do the integration, that they will make it a little bit more user-friendly in terms of the reporting and all that stuff. But again, the main information here is that we shouldn't expect that we need to do anything. Angular will just replace Karma under the hood with web test runner, and that's it. All right, so that's everything that I have prepared for this episode. I hope that the questions from the beginning have been answered. So we see that although Karma will be deprecated, that doesn't mean that we need to throw away our Jasmine tests. They still will stay. The only thing that changes is that Karma is replaced by a modern web test runner. That's it. And in terms of Jest, we see that it is now officially supported, which is a good thing, because when Angular integrates Jest into its own build system, Jest doesn't have to use its own build system and has to deal with all the Angular special cases, Angular compilation things on its own. This is now all taken care of Angular, and Angular is also using ESBuild for the compilation process. So this is a very good thing, I would say. If you start right now with an Angular project, what should you choose? It's your decision. I mean, Jasmine has proven itself for many years. Yeah, there is a little bit of an overhead with the tests, but Jasmine will not be deprecated. On the other side, we see that Jest is the one that the majority of developers, JavaScript developers, is using or are using. We also see that the Angular approach is quite promising. It's still experimental, so there might be a little risk in it. But I personally, if you ask me, I would go with Jest at the moment. But again, as I said, that's more or less my personal opinion. You don't make any mistake if you go with Jasmine or Jest. Okay, before I end, maybe give me the opportunity of a little bit of a promotion. So if you're interested in testing, we also provide a testing workshop, more or less happening on a regular basis. Just need to go to our webpage, that's angulararchitects.io. And we also do another workshop series in the summer, which is an end-to-end testing week. So we will cover Cypress and Playwright within 5 days. So if you're interested in that, maybe I'll see you then there. Otherwise, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please add it to the comments. Don't hesitate. Of course, I would be happy if you would subscribe to this channel. I will keep it updated with videos about Angular. And then see you maybe in the next video. Goodbye.